On this episode, the importance of keeping water-sensitive urban design elegant and simple as we continue to develop it. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro, where today we're talking about why it's so important as we continue to implement water-sensitive urban design, to continue to grow water-sensitive urban design, that we keep the processes that we implement in association with it, we keep those processes simple, and that we don't keep adding complexity to the system. So why am I interested in this? Why has this topic come up today? Well, it's come up for a couple of reasons. One is just recently I've been delving back into the literature, for the first time in a little while, delving back into the published literature, looking at what exactly is it about urbanization that causes our creeks and our waterways to degrade. Like, we know that it's really clear, the urban stream syndrome, urbanization happens, the creeks to which that urbanization drains, they degrade, but it's a little less clear what the actual mechanisms causing that degradation are. Is it the connection of impervious surfaces, for example, and the associated changes in hydrology? Is it changes in water quality, concentrations of pollutants in the water? Is it clearing of riparian areas? Is it changes in stream, disconnection in stream by putting culverts across waterways? It could be many, many of these things. And I've been delving back into this, and it struck me that there are a lot of similarities between ultimately what will solve our water quality issues and what will also solve flooding issues and water supply issues. The solution to them all is one and the same, and I'll get back to that and how that relates to simplicity. And reason number two is yesterday I had a great conversation with a Brazilian civil engineering student called Arta, who's out in Australia doing a bit of an exchange program. We caught up and had a great chat, and this was one of the topics that we spoke to, and hence why I'm making this video today. So, simplicity. Here's the thing. Here's how I, when we're talking about simplicity, view our transition or our implementation to date of water-sensitive urban design. I look at our cities and go, okay, historically, we started managing stormwater to deal with flooding and drainage issues, essentially getting water away from the urban areas as quickly as possible. And so a lot of our practices about how we pipe, how we install pipes in the urban areas, how we do flood detention, how we leave areas around waterways for flooding, was all based on that paradigm, that desire to prevent flooding. And it's a very good desire, and it's a very important desire. But when we initially focused on that, and I say we, the collective we as stormwater, water-sensitive urban design industry, when we initially collectively focused on that, it was the only focus. So those responses that were developed were, ideally, the most efficient responses to that one particular focus. They were appropriate. Then what happens is, fast forward a couple of decades further on, suddenly water, like the waterway impacts, I was going to say water quality, but it's not just water quality, but the waterway impact side of this pops up on the radar and also becomes a focus. But at this stage, our practices with respect to flooding are already really embedded in place. So what happens is, people come along and go, okay, we are going to, flooding stuff is fixed. We do flooding this particular way. What is now the most efficient way to also do water quality? Also is a really important word here, to also do water quality, do the other environmental impacts. And people come along and go, okay, what we need to do is we need to find room to fit bioretention systems in the landscape, some wetlands in there, maybe we'll do some permeable paving, maybe we'll put some rainwater tanks in. But critically here, it's in addition, because in our minds, the stormwater flooding processes were already fixed in place as the best option, the right thing to do. So we add more on top, which is more complexity. This is where the complexity issue comes into it. The problem here is that ultimately, it's not, when it comes to the water cycle, it's not just flooding and then the environmental impacts on creeks that have a problem. We also have problems in our urban landscapes with getting water away too quickly and drying out the urban landscapes and destroying the soils in those urban landscapes so nothing grows in them, so then we don't have nice trees and cooling effects. There are multiple elements associated with this, and if we continue down the same path to date, what's going to happen is that we'll start with the flooding and get the most efficient response to that, and we'll lock it in. Lock it in, Eddie. We'll lock it in. Then we come along, we want to do the environmental impacts on waterways element, and we figure out, with this bit locked in, what is the next most efficient way to do it? And we go, okay, sweet, lock that in on top over here. Then we come along and maybe we go, oh wait, hang on, we need to get more water back into our soils in the urban areas. Okay, well we've got these two things over here locked in. Let's figure out the most efficient way with them locked in. Okay, it's this, add more complexity on top. And then we go, okay, shading. We need to get more shade into our urban areas. Okay, add more complexity on top of that. And the system gets more and more complex. And as it gets more and more complex, it gets more and more costly, it gets harder and harder to manage. And it ignores the fundamental underlying principle for all of this, which I suspect is there, and I suspect from looking at the literature, is that the underlying processes that cause flooding, that cause degradation of urban waterways, that cause us to degrade our urban soils, to not get enough water into our urban soils, to ultimately then not have nice shady trees and urban microclimate. Ultimately, the causes beneath all of those are the same. So instead of, go back a step, they're the same. So we don't need to be constantly building complexity into the system every time we solve one of those problems one after another. If we solve them all at once, we can probably, most likely, I believe, solve them with one elegant solution that fixes them all and just builds in a relatively small amount of complexity. The same amount of complexity as probably exists in the current flooding paradigm, right? Because instead of going, here's some complexity, build, 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 we just go, whole lot, let's build one elegant system that deals with it all. Now, having said that, this isn't meant to be a criticism of the way we've done things to date, because we all know that this is really complex. There's like, and we've talked about 4 different manifestations of these ultimate underlying problems here. It's really complex. I think it's actually unrealistic to expect someone first up, when they first start to identify that, oh, actually it's not only flooding that's a problem, but we've got water quality impacts and maybe these soil impacts as well. I just think it's unrealistic to expect people to first time round be able to get the nice elegant solution. So I believe the right response is to make a first step at it, which will probably be to tack a bit more onto the system and see what happens. And that is what I believe, that's where I believe we're at in the implementation of the environmental aspects of waterway health in water sensitive urban design. We are at that, okay, we've had a first crack of doing some of it, we've accidentally created some more complexity, but that's okay, because we've learned a lot in the process. Now where we're at is, okay, let's take a step back and see whether we can refine this and make it simpler and more elegant to solve the problems. And where I think that's going to go is that there's a lot of fundamental underlying truth in that flooding, a lot of environmental impacts on waterways, and a lot of problems with there not being enough moisture getting into the soils that are left in urban areas, all fundamentally relates to the way we destroy topsoil in urban development, we pave over urban areas, and we directly connect to creeks. The same solution that fixes one of those in order to fix, say, waterway health issues will ultimately go a long way to fixing the flooding side of things and probably the soil health side of things. And that is the importance. No, that's the possibility of simplicity. The importance of simplicity is that it will save us money in the long term. Rather than building in complexity, rather than building in extra costs as we put layer on layer on layer onto this, if we get it elegant and we get it simple, we should be able to solve all of these things with no more complexity than the current system has. And that's important if we're going to be able to do this in the long term and make this financially viable and financially sustainable in the long term for society. Sweet. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you next time.